Welcome to the White Witch podcast with me, Carly. Hope you are all well, witches. On today's episode, we will be talking all about the goddess Circe. And our book review for today is The Black Toad, Country Witchcraft and Magic, written by Gema Gary. So I firstly have to start off by saying this book is probably not one for you to buy for your own personal craft, but a great insight into old traditional folk magic from the region of Cornwall. Cornwall, Devon and the West Country are some of the most isolated parts of Great Britain, and as a result, Christianity arrived to these parts later than it did to the rest of the country. This meant many of the customs and traditions there remained well preserved. This book is a combination of folk magic, Christian prayers. There are lots of invocations and incantations to Jesus, Mother Mary, and the Holy Ghost. The spells often include psalms and biblical verses. So it's not really magic you would in the main put into practice, but a great outline of how magic could have looked within these parts. The book references the Bookadoo, so the Booker, who we discussed on the folklore Cornish Witchcraft episode. And Gema Gary talks about how the Booker could be called upon to bless and curse. Akin to the book Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horne that we reviewed on the podcast, this book outlines similar initiations, one which involves running around a church 9 times, saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, after which the devil should appear in the form of a toad. Parts that stuck with me were the horse or animal heart that would be covered in nails and pins and placed on the inside of the fireplace of a home as a form of protection. The stone spells for removing warts. The spell using a toad's body and hot bricks until the toad turned to ash. The ashes would be put into a small bag and the bag would be placed over the heart to stop the individual from bleeding from a wound. The book also talks about how snail shells would be collected, worked into charms for protection as a result of the shell, but also fertility, sexual force, and for creation. I thought it was funny, a lot of the spells involved stealing lead off of the church roof as well. This book definitely presses on the fact that all witches would have carried out both blessings and curses. You would seek out a witch to do both. Therefore, if you can heal, you can curse. I loved the chapter breakdown of Old Mother Redcap with these spells for protection and defense, cure charms and spells for desires and fortunes. The Old Mother Green Cap chapter that delves into plant magic, so plant charms, the virtue of trees, and also the Old Mother Black Cap chapter where it got juicy with the curse magic, weather witchcraft, and retaliation magic. I'll read you this little section of the book. This is actually from the foreword of the book, which is written by Michael Howard, but it gives some good insight into some of the Cornish ways. In the deep wooded valleys, on the wild, desolate moors, and the wave-lashed seashores of the southwest of England, the witch and the wizard, the cunning man and the wise woman, the charmer and the peller, still practice their bright and dark arts. Ordinary people leave out offerings to the good people, the piskies and the pixies, while claiming that the bowls of milk and honey are for the hedgehogs. The wild hunt with its demon hounds roams Exmoor and Dartmoor on dark and stormy nights, harvesting the souls of the dead. Across the West Country, when the moon is full, covens gather to work the old magic. As their ancestors did before them, they revere the horned one or man in black by traditional names of Bookadoo, Dewar, Old Nick, and the Devil, and honour his consort, the dark and bright Queen of Elfame. I find Gema Gary a fascinating author. It's definitely well worth checking out her YouTube page. She oozes poise, calm, and knowledge. She talks very calmly, is absolutely mesmerizing, distinctly glamorous in a Morticia Adams type way. I'll post a little video of her in the show notes talking about the crafts. She has a lot of links to Boscastle's Witchcraft Museum and Cecil Williamson, the founder of the museum. He, in turn, had strong links to Aleister Crowley and Gerald Gardner. There are no links with Wicca and Cornish witchcraft depicted in this book at all. So I adored the last section of the book about the black toad. This was my favourite part about how the toad is synonymous and emblematic with the devil and the witch in West Country lore. So we'll definitely look at that on the next Cornish Witchcraft podcast about the spell work side of things. Join me after the break when we talk all about Circe. Welcome back. So let's talk all about Circe. Circe has been depicted in Greek mythology as a goddess, sometimes as a nymph, which is a minor nature god, seen as the goddess of magic, a witch, or an enchantress. She had an affinity and knowledge of herbs and potions, which she would oftentimes use against her enemies and those who happened to offend her. Through the use of these herbs and potions, she would turn many into wild animals. Circe holds the power of transformation, sorcery, transmutation, necromancy, and shapeshifting. I even saw Circe given the title of the original witch, as she is one of the very first few to use and develop witchcraft, so others like us can use it today. She is often depicted as a symbol of feminist power. She is shown as a strong and assertive woman, neither good nor evil. She is merely human and often acts upon her feelings. She is seen as having an ambivalent character and has been depicted by many an artist. Circe possessed a wand or staff called a rhabdos, which she would channel her magic through, and this reference to a wand is the earliest mention in Western writing of this magical tool. It made an appearance in Homer's poem The Odyssey, as Circe uses it to turn Odysseus's men into beasts. So I've always been confused as to Circe's parents. Many reports state she was daughter of Helios, the mightiest of all the Titans who represented the sun, and Perse, the ocean nymph. However, other accounts came up that state she was daughter of Hecate and the god Aeetes. I read that Hecate predates many Olympians, so this is why it's sometimes said she is favoured as Circe's mother, but more dominantly I found it written it was Perse and Helios that were her parents. So with her parents as Helios and Perse, she is said to have two brothers, one named Aeetes, who looks after the golden fleece, a fleece that was the property of royalty that was made from the wool of a golden ram that had wings. Circe's other brother was also Perse, and she had one sister, Persephone, who was queen of the Greek island Crete and the wife of King Minos. So Persephone was said to have given birth to the Minotaur, a creature that was half man, half bull, who had the body of a man and head of a bull. Circe had noble bloodlines within her. She is the granddaughter of 4 titans, cousin to the king of the Olympians, Zeus. But despite her background, Circe wasn't as her family had hoped she would be, despite coming from such a noble family line. She had many charming family members, yet she was seen as lacking all goddess-given beauties and enticements. She was very much cast aside by her family, being seen as not holding any real beauty. She was neither particularly well respected or admired by them. Circe was inherently aware of her shortcomings compared to her family. She was said to lack beauty, so not seen as marriage material. She was denied a kingdom of her own due to her lack of leadership skills, so she remained with the Titans and Olympians and kept to herself. During her self-isolation, she began to develop her craft, and it's said some of this ability could have come from her maternal parentage, but she was likely destined to have these abilities, predominantly potion making and spell casting. But she had a short temper and would cast curses through spell casting on those who ridiculed her to cause them harm for the hurt that they caused her. So she could have used her skills for good, but her anger took over and her spell casting took a darker route. Much of her spell casting was used as a result of her short fuse when it came to would-be lovers. If they upset her, even in the slightest, she would turn them into an animal. This was her most common spell to carry out, so it began to take no energy on her to cast this. Many men would, as a result, avoid dating her, and after a while, any excuse she could find to turn a man into an animal as a punishment, even if they had no intention of harming her, she would use. And this would eventually cause Circe her punishment. One story is of Circe falling in love with the sea god Glaucus. So no matter how hard she tried to seduce him, she could not win his heart. Glaucus was besotted with Scylla. So Circe poisoned the water where Scylla bathed, which turns her into a sea monster. It's said that this was the cause of Circe being exiled to the remote island of Ea. And Ea is believed to be located off the southern coast of Italy. So this meant lifelong banishment on this island, far away from her home and family. Another version of the story relating to Circe is that she was exiled by Helios, her father, to live alone on Ea as punishment for killing the Prince of Colchis, who was Circe's husband at the time. Another variant to this story is linked to the legend of Jason and Medea, so the adventures of the Argonauts. Apollonius, the philosopher, states that Jason and Medea showed treason to the Colchian prince Absyrtus and brutally killed him. They try to escape. They end up on Circe's island, where she purifies them of their sins. However, once she found out what they did, she chased them away before they could do the same to her. So once upon the island in her solitary existence, she was known for luring sailors into drinking with her and then turning them through her potions into beasts, such as lions, dogs, wolves, and pigs. She also spent a lot of time honing her craft, but also taming her wild beasts. In Homer's Odyssey, Circe is described as a beautiful enchantress with oddly docile wild animals wandering around her home. So Odysseus is on his way back from war and sends some men ahead of him to check out the lay of Circe's island. Circe invites them into her home for food and wine, and all but one of the men turn up. The one to not turn up is Eurylochus, who is suspicious of Circe and hurries to warn Odysseus. The men that stay for the food are not offered the usual meat and wine of traditional hospitality, but instead cheeses, barley, honey, Pramnia wine, which is not really wine, like more of a strange brew, but in essence, food which is often more appropriate for the dead, And it's said that by offering these items, Circe is condemning them to the realm of the underworld. So the men present at the feast were turned to pigs. Before Odysseus reaches Circe, Hermes stops him and reveals how he can defeat Circe and free his crewmates. Hermes gives Odysseus the herb moly that will protect him from Circe's magic. He warns Odysseus that he must draw his sword and act as though he will attack her, which will spark Circe to invite him to bed with her. Before he accepts, he must ask Circe to swear by the names of the gods that she will return his men and not hurt him. Otherwise, she would still have the chance to turn him into an animal whilst they're in bed together. Another account I read is that Circe gives Odysseus the same potion, but as he has the herb, he doesn't turn into a pig, draws his sword, and Circe begs him in disbelief to forgive her. So the herb that Hermes gives to Odysseus was said to have grown from the blood of the giant Picolus, killed on Circe's island by Helios, her father and her ally. So when the giant tried to attack Circe, in this description, the flower had a black root for the colour of the blood of the slain giant and a white flower, either for the white sun that killed him or the fact that Circe grew pale of terror. Homer also describes moly by saying the root was black while the flower was as white as milk. The gods call it moly. Dangerous for a mortal man to pluck from the soil, but not for the deathless gods. All lies within their power. That's how Ovid describes it in his book 14 of his Metamorphoses, a white bloom with a root of black. Odysseus manages to overcome Circe and free his men by following Hermes' advice. The crew stay upon Circe's island and she pampers them. They eat good meals, drink hearty wine. Odysseus and Circe go on to have 3 sons, Agrius, Latinus, and Telegonus. So before the crew and Odysseus leave the island, she advises Odysseus to travel to the underworld to understand how to appease the gods so they can return him home safely. She bestows upon him protections and ways to speak with the dead. She advises him as well that there are 2 routes home for him and his men, but to exceed extreme caution as both routes were highly dangerous. The men do not heed these warnings and suffer a terrible fate as a result. In Hesiod's Theogony, Circe and Odysseus' son Telegonus becomes ruler over the Terstonoi, or the non-Greek people in Etruscans. Circe tells Telegonus who his father is and why he abandoned them, and Telegonus has an overwhelming desire to find his missing father. He decides to head out to find him. Circe gives him a poisoned spear that ultimately leads to Odysseus being killed. Unsure of how or why his father died, Telegonus brings his body back to the island Ea and buries him. Circe makes her children immortal once Odysseus' body is buried, and it's seen this is perhaps a secret reward for ending the man she believed tricked and used her. Circe was also said to have fallen in love with a mortal called Picus, and Circe was determined to have him. He was married and fiercely devoted to Canons, his wife, so refused Circe's advances. Circe couldn't cope with another man who wouldn't accept her, so she cursed him to live the rest of his days as a woodpecker, and his wife Canons threw herself into the river Tiber due to the sorrow of losing her husband. In mythology, Circe is stated as one of the most famous witches of antiquity, seen as particularly expert in multiple drugs or poisons, able to operate metamorphoses. She is a powerful magician, sometimes sorceress. Her name is said to mean sparrowhawk, which is a bird of prey, and the female of the species are larger than the male, which of course lines up with much of her backstory, where she embodies the dominant woman who is said to hunt men. But the name Circe is also said to mean her hoop round. Her name evokes beauty, sensuality, and danger, and men were said to be either in horror or fascination at her. She has, of course, become an amazing muse for many a writer, painter, and musician. So I came across a painting of her by John William Waterhouse from 1892, where she is depicted going into a cave where her rival bathed, and she is seen pouring out a liquid from a drug that she has drawn using fatal roots, which links to the lore of her and her rival Scylla, where she turns her into a sea monster. So her bad reputation came from her dominance over men and the humiliation she caused to them through transforming them into animals, mostly pigs. Circe is also associated with instability. And in that moment, I knew that many of us could relate, myself definitely. And also mixing things, be it herbs with one another, drugs with food, or men with animals. Some associations and symbols relating to Circe are cups, goblets, libation bowls, wands, sacred animals like lions, wolves, beasts, hawks, pigs, associated plants, moly, hallucinogenic plants, wheat, bleeding hearts, also poisonous plants. Colours are purple, gold, silver, red. Devotional acts you could try out if you decide to work with Circe are treat yourself like royalty. Circe lived on the island of Ea, where she treated herself like royalty, and so could you. Wear red, gold, silver, purple, again, colours of royalty that are associated with her. You could make offerings such as barley, wine, honey, meat, bread. You could also use on your altar small depictions of wolves, hawks, lions. You could put on your altar herbs, especially lavender for some reason. But yeah, lots of different herbs to represent the plant magic that she did. Some witches like to offer up poisonous or hallucinogenic plants. You know, that's not me recommending this to you by any means. Belladonna is particularly sacred to Circe. Also, frankincense and myrrh incense, bleeding heart flowers, again, snowdrops. Divination as a devotional form. She was said to be a huge fan of divination. Also, work on your herbal teas, your tinctures, your potions, and just understand as much as you can about plants and transmutation. Circe paved the way for witches to learn the art and use it in our own unique ways. She proves that anyone can learn witchcraft, yet it takes energy on the learner's part to use it positively rather than letting it be controlled by our emotions. Circe can show us where we are about to bend to judgments or limitations of others. She can bring us a love of solitude, great interest in witchcraft, spells, and natural ailments, also using herbs to heal. I loved this quote from Madeline Miller's book, Circe. I'm about to start reading it. I wanted to do this episode before I got into that. I didn't want to kind of get too swayed on, that version of it. So here we go. Let me say what sorcery is not. It is not divine power, which comes with a thought and a blink. It must be made and worked, planned and searched out, dug up, dried, chopped and ground, cooked, spoken over and sung. Even after all that, it can fail as gods do not. If you work with Circe or you're thinking of it, I really think you should consider the book Entering Hecate's Garden by Cindy Brannon. It is the ultimate book if you decide to work with herbs and work on like potions and tinctures and so on. In it, she describes how Circe and Medea are Hecate's daughters. So in the book, she describes Circe as the mistress of plant spirit medicine, and Medea is the mistress of the poison path. She also goes into much regarding the pharmacae. So the pharmacae is like basically refers to plants and their chemical properties. But in ancient times, it was used to refer to a wise woman or witch. And this word is, of course, the root for the English word pharmacist. If we first look at the etymology of pharmacae itself, it's related to witches as plant people and their knowledge of plants and the effects their substances can create. So for today's episode, I've used Witchquarium's work, GreekGodsAndGoddesses.net, and also an article by Andrea Morgan from Wicca magazine. So that's all I have for you on Circe today. I'm really losing my voice today, so I haven't been feeling like 100%. So I do apologize. If you love witchcraft, if you want to have grimoire pages of all the episodes that we do, I have got a Patreon called the White Witch Coven. The links will be in the show notes, but it's £6 a month. You can, be on there for as long as you want, or as little as you want. You can cancel at any time. You're not signed up for life. There are grimoire pages of the podcast episodes. They're all very pretty, very witchy, dark academia style. We also have a Patreon exclusive podcast episode every month. We have loads of extra witchy content, and we also have our witchy conversations with our coven over on Discord. We just had a conversation all about Mabon, and that was lovely. Such a lovely group of witches. I felt great after the call. It was very, very, very uplifting. You can find me on Instagram at The White Witch Company. I'm on Facebook, The White Witch Company. My email address is carly@thewhitewitchcompany.co.uk. One of the best things I could ask if you could ever do for the show, if you feel the call to, is to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It means that other witches get to find the show. But aside from that, thank you so much for listening, all of your support, sending you lots and lots and lots of witchy love, and I'll be back soon. Have a great week, witches.